Welcome to Tigray Television. I'm Mary Mana and with today's English news. Stay tuned. Proceeding to the details, Ethiopia ranks first on the list of countries with highest numbers of wasted children in the world. According to findings from Global Report on Food Crisis in 2021, more than 4 million children under the age of 5 in Ethiopia are wasted.
Calling for the release of all Tigrayan prisoners being held for their ethnic identities. The protesters also called for an independent investigation in the days of General Gabramedhin and to an end to the genocidal war on Tigray. The government of Tigray issued a statement earlier this week calling for an independent and internationally led investigation into the death of Major General Gabramedhin and all other Tigrayan arrested on the basis of their identity. The Ethiopian government has admitted to detaining 17,000 members of Ethiopia's National Defense Forces at the outset of the conflict in November, many of whom are yet to come before a court.
Many youth in Tigray have found their lives dislocated by the ongoing conflict. Some have been forced to join the battlefield after witnessing gruesome violence on innocent civilians. Many have been left without a job or any clarity on their future prospects. Our reporters visited Housing Square in Ma'ala, where a young group of people have started breakfast feeding program for children and spoke with one of the organizers, Haben Taghlu, a musician and actor who put his dreams on hold to do what he can to support his family. Aragawi Garunkail has the report.
Haben Taghlu is a resident of Mekelle and a member of the Young Men Christian Association. Before the war broke out, him and his friends at the YMCA used to produce movies. He says he loves acting and singing, but since the war, him and his friends have had to drop their passion altogether. He said they have instead chosen to focus on helping their community.
Right after the war broke out in December, me and my friends started the People for People project in cooperation with the Organization for Social Service, Health and Development to help displaced persons. Most left all their belongings behind, so we had to help them.
Haben says they first started to organize the community to provide food for IDPs. They used to support 15 centers in Mekelle. But after the start of the siege, Haben says him and his friends recognized that ordinary residents too were at risk of hunger. So, the organization started to provide breakfast for the children of Mekelle at Housing Square, the center of the city.
Some of the children here came here from as far as Lachi, that's close to 7 kilometers from here. We are just giving them tea and 2 breads. This is extremely difficult to witness. We are providing breakfast not worth more than timber, but the children travel such long distances. More than that, they have to start their journey at dawn to get there in time for breakfast. They sometimes start their journey at dawn, and this can be this. We all had passions. Many here were students, and many had their own careers, but were instead doing this work now. But as artists, we try to document the current situation.
The children Haben and his friends are helping represent just a blip of the humanitarian crisis in Tigray. Many more across the region are going hungry every day, unable to fulfill basic needs as the Ethiopian government continues to block aid and all other essential services.
The violence on Tigrayans started long before the war was declared on November of 2020. For years, Tigrayans living outside the region were harassed, displaced, killed, and their properties destroyed. Many have been sheltered in IDP camps for years before the outbreak of conflict. We have visited Ndat, an IDP camp that has been sheltering IDPs from all corners of Ethiopia for 4 years now. Our reporter Sarun Tsagai spoke to one IDP that says he feels abandoned by the world as the Ethiopian government continues to fight and chuck hold of aid coming into Tigray.
This is an IDP center commonly known as Inda'atan in Qadamai Wayana sub-city, Maqala. The IDP center, its establishment preceded the mass displacement of Tigrayans from different corners of Ethiopia. IDPs here have sheltered at the center for more than 3 years, with no end in sight. They say the current crisis has further worsened conditions at the center, and that they have been overlooked by both aid organizations and the rest of the world. Abraha Kebeda was a resident of Haik in Amhara region. He says he had lived there for close to 5 decades. He says he had raised his children there and built a profitable business until almost 3 years ago, when a group of armed men started attacking Tigrayans in the area. Abraha says he was forced to leave behind all his belongings as he ran to save his life.
I was displaced from South Wallo, Haik in the Amhara region. I had been living there since 1976. I was a merchant. I had 8 houses and other belongings. I had a family there. My children were born and raised there.
Abraha says that before the start of the war, he had connection with his 3 sons in Addis Ababa and a daughter in Hausen, Tigray. But now, because of the communications blackout, he doesn't know where his children are or whether they're alive or dead.
I'm here,
My 3 sons have graduated from university. After graduation, they had started working in Addis Ababa. I don't know if they are alive or not. My daughter also lived in Hausen at the start of the war. I heard that she was displaced from Hausen with her 3 children, but I couldn't find her. I don't know where she is and if she is alive or not.
Abraha says he often thinks of Des. He says the condition in the IDP camp have been unbearable. For months, IDPs at the center have received even a drop of aid.
Before the war, our government used to help us monthly. Now, we are forgotten. I'm not the only one who needs help here. We have elderly such as me, people with disabilities, bedridden, children and mothers. We all need help. We can't work and provide for ourselves. Even our skin shows how bad our living conditions are. Most of the time, I wish I was dead rather than suffering like this. But death doesn't come just because you call for it.
Abraha calls on the international community to stand with the people of Tigray. He says the world has to play its part to end the conflict and ensure that aid is able to reach Tigray.
The world needs to know that we are suffering, starving and dying. The situation here is terrifying. Aid isn't coming into Tigray. Millions are at the brink of death as they have nothing to eat. The government of Ethiopia is working to wipe out Tigrayans from the face of the earth. We know there are international agreements to help citizens of the world in need, so the world must see us. They must help us.
There are more than 2.2 million IDPs in Tigray. Most were displaced from the western part of the region, and others, like Abraha, were displaced as a result of the violence perpetrated on Tigrayans across other corners of Ethiopia, all banished to a place where they can't access food aid or other basic services.
Mulu Gabru was a restaurant owner in Gambela in western Tigray in 2018 when she says violence and hostility towards Tigrayans had grown to such an extent that she decided to leave her business and her belongings behind. She's been sheltered at an IDP camp for close to 3 years now. Mulu has now started to grow vegetables at the IDP camp with the hopes of gaining some income to support her 2 children, but the road has not been easy. Our reporter Sarah Kallali has more.
This is Mulu Gabru. She and her 2 children have been sheltered at the Inda'atan Center for IDPs since before the start of the war. Mulu and her family were victims of the large-scale displacement of Tigrayans in 2018. Mulu and her children were displaced from Gambela, where she owned a small restaurant in an area called Gondar Safar, and her husband worked as a driver for an NGO. She says she left when armed men started to attack Tigrayans.
Since 2016, there used to be clashes in the area. Many Tigrayan were assaulted because of their identity and investors as well, including me and my family. I used to own a restaurant there, and sometimes people would come in, eat food, and go without paying simply because I was Tigrayan.
Mulu says her husband decided to leave when the violence started to intensify. She says he was beaten and harassed continuously.
My husband, I started doing the exercises here. I tried to do all the exercises the doctors showed me.
Mulu says she recently started to grow vegetables at the IDP camp so her and her children could have something to eat while there is no food aid. but she says it's been hard to focus on her work while knowing that her daughter is back at the shelter alone.
ኣብዚ እውን ጓልይ ደቂሰ የስርሕ ኣብዚ እውን ክትገለ ጀሚረኒ እኹ ሰላጣ ምንም ዕረፍቲ የብለይን ደቂሳ ግን ይኸደ ወላ ዓዳጋ ገለ ክሽቅጥ ግን ህንደይ ነገር ምኮራ ይገብር ግን አእምሮዬ ንድሕሪት እዩ
I started growing vegetables here. I put my daughter to sleep when I'm working. I don't have any time to rest. I go to the market to sell my products, but even when I'm at the market, my mind is at home with my daughter.
Betlehem Tesfai is a public health officer that works at Madut, a charity organization near the IDP camp where Mulu and her children are sheltered. Betlehem and her organization have been providing medical service to Inda'atan IDP Center. She says despite the many challenges Mulu is facing, she is working hard to provide for her and her family, and that women like Mulu need to be encouraged.
She started growing vegetable in the garden so her and her children could have food. This really needs to be encouraged.
The 2.2 million IDPs in Tigray have been one of the most greatly affected by the ongoing siege that has blocked all food aid and discontinued basic services.
Irob, a district in eastern Tigray, is one of the areas that has seen gross atrocities during the occupation of Tigray by Ethiopian forces and its allies. 4 districts in the area remain under occupation by Eritrean forces and continue to subject its residents to unspeakable violence and kidnapping.
During the invasion of Europe, a district in eastern Tigray by Eritrean troops, many civilians were atrociously massacred, and their food resources were taken, and their properties were looted. As a result, numerous people are on starvation.
The Europe district was rich in honey, cattle, goats, and sheep, but all these were looted by the invading forces. Now we have nothing. Firewood, household objects, our clothes, including blankets, were all taken.
Right after the occupation of our vicinity by the invading forces, all our livestock were looted.
Residents of the district explained that their relatives in 4 vicinities of the district are still under the occupation of Eritrean forces. Besides, the residents say that the Eritrean forces are abducting youth from the district and have no clue about their whereabouts.
The district has been partitioned into 2. The vicinities of Ndalgeda, Alitena, Waratala, and Agarankoma are still occupied by the enemy. The people of Europe is in desperate situation. Ours are being abducted and taken captive by the invading forces. We have no idea of what is happening to our children.
Musganna Alama, a local official from the district, tells that out of the 80 vicinities of the district, 4 of them are under the occupation of Eritrean forces, and residents of the vicinities are put in dire situation due to the siege that has been imposed on them.
The people of Europe are part of the people of Tigray. The land of Europe belongs to Tigray. Our people are facing many atrocities repeatedly, though the invading forces have no right to occupy it. The residents of Adargeda, Waratle and Agarale areas are unable to go to market in Dohan because they are being threatened not to go to areas controlled by the government of Tigray. So they are on starvation and also couldn't access healthcare services.
Tesfai Kahsai, administrator of the Europe district, says that a number of people from the district have been kidnapped by the Eritrean troops and their whereabouts remain unknown.
The district is still partially under occupation of the invading forces. Especially 2 vicinities are completely held captive and the rest 2 are partially occupied. The residents of these vicinities are civilians who have got nothing to do with military affiliations of any sort. However, 21 civilians including 5 women have been kidnapped. The number of people who are being abducted is increasing from time to time.
It is to be recalled that the government of Tigray has been repeatedly calling the international community to put pressure on the region in Asmara to withdraw its troops from areas it has been controlling, even after it forced evacuation of most areas in June 2021. In his open letter, written 3 days ago to Chairperson of African Union, the Vice President Debretsion Gebremekel emphasized the need to give due attention to the looming danger of widening instabilities caused by the Eritrean government.
That was a report presented by Karom Al-Dabrahan. The ongoing siege on Tigray has blocked the entry of all essentials, including food, medical supplies, and fuel. As a result, the entire population of Tigray is
at his village, as it is running out of medical supplies. On top of that, he couldn't even get an ambulance service to get a medical help at Magala, as fear in all over Tigray is depleted due to the ongoing siege by the Ethiopian government. For this reason, his relatives had no choice to carry him on a litter and travel for more than 4 hours on foot to bring him to Magala Hospital. Radai Gabriel, brother-in-law of Mabratan, has this to say about the dire situation they have been through.
The patient is my brother-in-law. We came here carrying him on our shoulders. We started our journey at 4 o'clock in the dawn, and we traveled for more than 4 hours on foot before we get help on our way.
According to Radai, they used to get ambulance services 24/7 before the war. However, these days, they are forced to carry their patients and travel on foot to get medical help.
Previously, we used to get ambulance service for pregnant mothers and patients even at late nights. But currently, there are no ambulances and we are forced to carry our patients to get medical helps, as the health center in our village has also run out of medical supplies.
Radai also said that although they reached after a long and exhausting journey, they couldn't even get the service they need, as the hospital has run out of basic medical supplies.
The health professionals here are ready to help us, but we have to go to the private clinics to run some tests and buy medicines. There is none at the hospital. Things are becoming very difficult for us these days, and we are forced to sell our belongings to cover our medical expenses.
Currently, close to 4 million people in Tigray are in dire need of medical care. However, the all-encompassing siege that blocked much-needed humanitarian aid from entering Tigray is meant a death sentence for millions of patients like Mabratan.
The war on Tigray and the all-encompassing siege that followed have had a devastating impact of livelihood of farmers in Tigray. Agricultural infrastructures, croplands, and farming tools have been looted and destroyed by Allied invading forces, leaving millions in destitute. We spoke with Professor John Nason from Ghent University that says he has extensively studied the impacts of the conflict on Tigray's agricultural output and says the war has had a major impact on the crop yield, showing a 20 to 50% decrease. Winta Kidana reports. Sablor Must report.
Tigray has managed to significantly improve agricultural productivity over the past 3 decades. This has in large part been due to the aggressive work done to recover degraded land in Tigray. Professor John Nason, professor of physical geography at Ghent University, has lived and worked with the people of Tigray and supported efforts to improve food security in the region.
That is using repeat photography, going to the same place 10 years later, 20 years later, taking photos from other people and comparing the landscape. Oh, before there were almost no trees, and now, so we have really seen that the growth of vegetation has been very strong in all these closed areas, and also the soil and water conservation, the building of stone bunds, the controlling of floods. A lot of work has been done. A lot of results have been done. You know, it is a mountain landscape, and mountain landscapes are always difficult to manage. When I show photos of Tigray, what has been done to people internationally in conferences, and they say all that in 20 or 30 years. So they are really surprised even by the intensity of the work that has been done.
The professor says that now it is possible that Tigray may have lost much of these gains due to the deadly conflict. The discontinuation of basic services, especially power supply, has had a severe impact on the environment, according to the professor.
In several places, there has been deforestation. Yeah, the overall picture is it has continued to grow, but at a slower speed, because very often people don't have electricity and they need to go somewhere and to chop a tree in order to have firewood or to make charcoal and to sell it to the towns. You must also know that if you see a place like Shire with all the internally displaced people from Western Tigray who are there, these people mostly, they need to cook by charcoal. So we have seen in the Tekeze Gorge, that there has been a deforestation in the Tekeze Gorge. This is a typical place where Shire is getting its firewood. So you have this type of local deforestation that is occurring.
He added that it seems that some of the destruction of the environmental conditions in Tigray appear to be systematic.
People are chopping trees. That is happening. We have also seen that around the beginning of 2021 in some places, and one place that's called Komasewa. Komasewa is a bit to the east of Adigrat. A whole forest of 10 hectares has been cut systematically and turned into charcoal. Don't know what has happened. Maybe an army that went there to make, or it was simply sent to Asmara. It's also possible. But there, systematically, the whole forest was cut. But generally, what we observe is chopping of trees for making charcoal.
What was clearly systematic, according to the professor, was that the violence and the threat of violence on Tigrayan farmers attempting to plow their lands and the impacts of airstrikes like the Togoga massacre that were crucial to securing the agricultural system.
When the Ethiopian and Eritrean soldiers were still there. So we have worked with telephone. At that time, the telephone line was sometimes working, especially in Mekele, because they wanted to give some image of normality, and people took big risks to communicate, shot, and then once farmers are shot, they are afraid for coming out, and the whole area, everybody becomes afraid for coming out. And they told us farmers will try to plow in the night. They need to be back at home at 8 or 9 o'clock before the soldiers start moving around. And then we monitored all that with satellite imagery, and that's called sentinel imagery. You get an image every 5 days, so you can follow quite exactly what they are doing. And we saw with time progressing, we saw the plowing was progressing. Overall, quite a lot of land has been plowed. I'm talking about last year. Quite a lot of land has been plowed, but it was plowed late.
The professor also highlighted that the restoration of basic services in Tigray was essential to ensure food security in Tigray, and asked for the international community to stand by farmers in Tigray that need the world to speak on their behalf.
The media are almost not talking anymore about Tigray. There is no more war. There is no more fighting, but a blockade. Also people imagine a blockade, that's something soft. Blockade of Cuba or blockade of Iran, but there is no problem for Cuba to import food, or there is no problem for Iran so the blockade of Iran or the blockade of Cuba is very soft in compared to a blockade of Tigray, where everything is systematically closed and nothing can come in. So the first thing is that there should be a really strong pressure from the international community to stop the war and to stop the blockade on Tigray. And then aid needs to start flowing and needs to get in really massively.
There are currently more than 6.5 million people in Tigray in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Many are sure to lose